My mother called me the night before my brother's wedding to tell me I wouldn't be sitting at the family table. Not because there wasn't room. Not because I'd done anything wrong. Because, she said, someone needed to stay behind and run the family bakery the next morning, and that someone was me. It's just for the morning shift, she said. You open at 7, handle the Saturday rush, and you can drive over to the venue by noon. You'll make it for the reception. I stood in my kitchen holding my phone against my ear and looked at the bridesmaid dress hanging on the back of my bathroom door. Blush pink. I'd paid $180 for it. I'd had it altered twice. I'm a bridesmaid, I said. Bridesmaid duties are mostly at the ceremony, she said. Veronica will manage. Veronica was my brother's fiancée's sister. Veronica, who had never met me until the engagement party 6 months ago, would manage the bridesmaid duties that I had spent 8 months helping plan. I didn't sleep that night. My brother's name is Theo. He's 4 years older than me, and he has always been, as my dad puts it, the one who kept the family together. What that means in practice is that Theo could do no wrong. When he crashed the car at 19, Dad paid the ticket and called it a learning experience. When he dropped out of his business degree after 2 years, Dad said he had an entrepreneurial spirit. When he announced his engagement to a woman none of us had met, Mom cried happy tears and started planning the menu before she'd even learned the woman's last name. My name is June. I am the one who covered the morning shifts. I am the one who learned the POS system, retrained the part-time staff after turnover, and drove 40 minutes each way 3 Saturdays a month for the past 2 years to help keep the bakery running while my parents got older, and my brother did whatever Theo does. The bakery is called Hazel & Co. It's been in my mother's family for 27 years. It sells sourdough, croissants, custom cakes, and the kind of breakfast pastries that get tagged on Instagram by food bloggers who drive in from the suburbs. It is legitimately successful. It is also, I would come to learn, a financial mess held together by my parents' stubbornness and a set of accounting practices that made my stomach drop the first time I really looked at them. But I didn't know that yet. On the night before my brother's wedding, I only knew that I was being asked, once again, to be the one who stayed behind. I told my mother I would open the bakery. I don't know why I said yes. Maybe I was tired of fighting. Maybe some part of me believed that if I kept being reliable enough, eventually they would notice. I had believed that for a long time. I set my alarm for 5:45, hung the bridesmaid dress back in the closet, and went to bed. I was at the bakery by 6:30. The morning was cold and gray, the kind of November morning where the sky never really gets bright. I let myself in through the back, turned on the ovens, checked the prep the evening staff had left, and started the opening checklist I'd written myself 18 months ago, because there hadn't been one before. By 9 o'clock, the line was out the door. That's normal for a Saturday. I ran the register, managed 2 part-time staff who were both newer than they should have been for a shift like this, and plated dozens of croissants while fielding a phone call about a custom cake order that had been entered wrong in the system. At 10:15, my phone buzzed. It was a photo from my cousin. She was at the venue. The ceremony space was decorated with white roses and eucalyptus. My brother stood at the altar in a navy suit, laughing at something the officiant said. The bridesmaids were already lined up. Blush pink dresses, all 5 of them, an empty spot where I was supposed to be. I looked at that photo for a long time. Then I put my phone in my apron pocket and went back to the register. My mother texted at 11, "You're doing great, honey. We'll save you a plate." I want to tell you that I got to the reception by noon, like she said, but at 11:40 one of the part-timers called out sick and the other asked to leave early because her kid had a fever. I was the only one left. I closed the bakery at 2, drove home, changed out of my flour-dusted clothes, and walked into the reception venue at 3:30, just as the speeches were ending. Nobody said anything about the empty seat in the ceremony photos. My mother hugged me and said, "You made it?" like I'd done something wonderful. My dad shook my head and said the morning must have been crazy. My brother was dancing with his new wife and didn't come over to me for the rest of the evening. I sat at a table near the back with some of my parents' friends from church who were very kind and didn't know any of the inside jokes. I drank 2 glasses of white wine and watched my family celebrate and thought about the bridesmaid dress still hanging in my closet with the dry cleaning tag still on it. On the drive home, I cried, not big dramatic crying, just the quiet kind, where you're not sure exactly what you're grieving, only that something in you has been patient for so long it's starting to go numb. It started, actually, 3 weeks later. I had been helping with the bakery's end-of-year inventory, again because my parents had asked, and again because I said yes, and I went looking in the accounting software for last year's figures to compare against. What I found didn't make sense. The bakery had a successful retail operation. Anyone who's been there on a weekend could tell you that. But the numbers I was looking at showed the business operating at a loss for 14 of the past 18 months. The payroll figures were higher than they should have been for the staff I knew we had. There were vendor payments to companies I didn't recognize. There was a recurring monthly transfer, substantial, consistent, dated the first of every month, going to an account I couldn't identify in the business records. I thought I'd made a mistake. I closed the file and opened it again. The numbers were the same. I have a degree in accounting. I don't talk about it much because my family never found it very interesting. Theo had an entrepreneurial spirit and I had a spreadsheet, but I graduated with a 3.8 GPA from a state school in Ohio, sat for the CPA exam twice, and worked for 4 years at a regional accounting firm before I started helping my parents more regularly. I know what a set of clean books looks like. These were not clean books. I printed nothing. I downloaded nothing. I just sat at the desk in the back office and looked at the screen for a long time. Then I started going back further. I stayed late 3 nights that week. My parents thought I was being diligent about the inventory. I was being something, but diligent wasn't the right word. What I found over those 3 nights was a picture that assembled itself slowly, the way those puzzles do where you don't understand the image until you've placed enough pieces. The monthly transfers were going to a personal account linked to my father's name. The vendor payments I didn't recognize corresponded to vendors who, when I searched them, either didn't exist or existed only as LLCs registered in my father's name. Inventory purchases that appeared in the books had no corresponding receipts in the filing system. The payroll included names of employees who had left the company months or years ago. This was not a mistake. This was not sloppy bookkeeping. My father had been systematically pulling money out of the family business for years. I drove home and sat in my car in my apartment parking lot for 45 minutes without going inside. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that parking lot. It wasn't just anger, though there was plenty of that. It was something more disorienting, because the bakery wasn't just a business. It had been in my mother's family for 27 years. Her mother had started it. My grandmother had stood behind that counter until she couldn't anymore. My mother had taken it over and poured herself into it. And somewhere along the way, the man she'd trusted with her family and her finances had been quietly hollowing it out. I didn't know if my mother knew. I genuinely didn't know. And that uncertainty was its own kind of grief. I went inside. I made tea. I didn't call anyone. The next morning, I called my college roommate, who is now a licensed CPA with a firm in Columbus. Her name is Ren, and she is one of those people who is exactly who she appears to be, which is rare enough that I've held on to her friendship for 12 years. I told her what I'd found without telling her where. I described the patterns. She listened without interrupting and then said, "That's classic skimming combined with fictitious vendor disbursements. That's not an accident. That's a scheme." "What do I do with it?" I asked. "Depends on what you want to do with it," she said. "If you want to protect the business, you document everything and bring it to a forensic accountant or an attorney. If it rises to a certain level, and from what you're describing it probably does, it also becomes a reportable matter." Reportable to who? IRS, potentially, state tax authorities. If there's bank fraud involved, FinCEN, you'd want a professional assessment first. I said I needed to think about it. She said she understood. Before we hung up, she said, "June, this is not yours to fix by yourself. Whatever happened, you didn't create this." I thought about that for a long time after we got off the phone. I spent the next 4 weeks documenting. I didn't take originals. I photographed what I could on my phone during my regular shifts. I made notes in a personal document I kept on a thumb drive I never left at the bakery. I cross-referenced bank statements with payroll records. I found inconsistencies in quarterly sales tax filings going back 6 years. I kept everything organized in a way that made the picture legible. Dates, amounts, account numbers, corresponding records, or the absence of them. I want to be clear that I did not do this in secret, because I wanted to hurt my family. I did it because every time I thought about walking up to my mother and saying, "Dad has been stealing from you for years," I needed to be sure. I needed to be so sure that there was no version of reality in which I was wrong. The cost of being wrong about something like that was a kind of damage I wasn't willing to cause. By the time December arrived, I was sure. I was also the only person left who was still covering weekend shifts. My parents were taking a cruise, a Christmas cruise, 2 weeks, the Caribbean, that they'd booked the previous spring. Theo and his wife were going to our family's place in Colorado. I was told, without much ceremony, that I should keep the bakery running while they were gone and that they'd left instructions with the part-time staff. The implication was that I would coordinate, manage, and fill in as needed. Unpaid, of course. As always. I said nothing. I made a note of the cruise dates. I called Ren back. "I'm ready," I said. We spent 2 hours on the phone that evening. Ren walked me through the referral process to a forensic CPA she trusted. She also told me what I should and shouldn't say and what not to do. Specifically, not to confront anyone, not to access anything I hadn't already accessed, and not to tell anyone in the family what I was doing. "These situations have a way of escalating if the subject knows they've been found out," she said. "You want the professionals to be the ones making contact." I said I understood. I called the forensic accountant the next morning. His name was Mr. Holt and his office was in Cleveland. I drove up on a Thursday, brought my documentation, and sat across from him in a quiet office while he went through what I'd compiled. He asked clear, methodical questions. He did not flinch, and he did not editorialize. At the end of an hour and a half, he said, "This appears to represent a significant and sustained pattern of financial misconduct. The scale you're describing would likely trigger reporting obligations at the federal level." "How significant?" I asked. He gave me a range. The low end made me lightheaded. The high end made me grab the arm of my chair. "This isn't my mother's fault," I said. I don't know why I asked it that way. I think I needed to say it out loud to someone who would tell me the truth. He looked at me carefully. "Based on what you've shown me, there's no indication that the account benefiting from these transfers belongs to or is accessible by anyone other than your father. Whether she was aware is a separate question that investigators would look at, but from a liability standpoint, the exposure appears to be his." I drove back to my apartment and sat on my couch and looked at my hands. Then I took the documentation to the IRS referral portal and submitted a formal report. I did the same with the Ohio Department of Taxation. Mr. Holt submitted a separate independent report as required by his professional obligations. I called Ren. "It's done," I said. "How do you feel?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said. My parents were somewhere in the Caribbean when the first contact from investigators occurred. I know this because I got a call from my mother's neighbor, who had seen an unfamiliar car in the driveway. I didn't explain anything. I said there might be some business-related paperwork my parents needed to take care of and that everything was fine. It was not entirely fine. The bakery, I found out later, was flagged during the preliminary review because of the discrepancies in the tax filings. A freeze was placed on the business accounts while the investigation was active, which meant payroll became complicated, and I had to tell the part-time staff that there might be a delay in their next checks. One of the harder conversations I've had in recent years. I kept the bakery open. I don't fully know why. Maybe because my grandmother had started it, and her hands were in every wall of that place. Maybe because the people who worked there hadn't done anything wrong. I covered shifts I wasn't asked to cover and handled vendors who were confused about payment holds, and I did it all while knowing that the reason we were in this situation was a man who had spent years treating the business as a personal account, while I drove 40 minutes each way on Saturdays for nothing. My parents came back from the cruise on a Tuesday. My father received a formal notice from the IRS within 48 hours. I was not at the house when it arrived. I found out from my mother, who called me crying. There's some kind of audit, she said. An investigation. They're saying it's fraud. I had rehearsed this moment in my head many times. I had planned careful, measured words. What I actually said was, "Mom?" I know. The silence on the other end of the phone was the longest I've ever sat through. "What do you mean you know?" she said. "I found the transfers," I said. "The vendor accounts, the payroll names. I found all of it 2 months ago." She started to say something and stopped. Started again. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to be sure," I said. "And because once I was sure, I needed it to be handled by people who weren't us." She cried for a long time. I sat and let her. I didn't say the other thing I was thinking, which was, "And because I sat in my car in a parking lot and thought about how you called me the night before your son's wedding and asked me to open the bakery, and nobody ever asks Theo to stay behind, and I have been staying behind my entire life." I didn't say that. Not that night. My father hired an attorney. There were several months of back and forth that I was not a party to, because by that point I had finally done the thing I should have done years earlier. I had stopped inserting myself into the middle of problems that were not mine to solve. I found an apartment closer to my actual job, the accounting position I'd been keeping at 30 hours a week, while giving the other 20 to a family business that had never compensated me for any of it. I gave notice to the bakery. I wrote a clear, professional handover document for whoever my parents brought in to manage things, including a note about what the books needed to correct themselves. I didn't hear from Theo for 3 months. When he finally texted, it was a single line. "Did you have to do it that way?" I looked at that message for a while, then I typed back, "Did you have to put me in the wedding photos with an empty slot where I was supposed to stand?" He didn't reply. My mother and I talk now, though differently than before. She is a woman who spent decades not looking at something, and now she has to look at it, and that is its own process that belongs to her. I have stopped trying to manage it. I have stopped trying to manage most things that aren't mine to manage. The investigation took about 11 months. My father reached a civil settlement with the IRS that involved a substantial repayment figure and significant penalties. There were no criminal charges filed. Federal fraud prosecutions are long and resource-intensive, and civil resolution is more common than people think. But the settlement figure was large enough that the financial reality of my parents' life changed materially. The house they'd owned for 30 years was refinanced. The cruise-level vacations are not happening anymore. The bakery is still open. My mother brought in an outside manager, a woman named... well, she's not part of this story. The bakery is still open. And on the days when I drive past it, I feel something complicated that I haven't entirely sorted out yet. I'm telling you this because I think a lot of people know what it's like to be the one who stays behind. Not just at a wedding, not just at a holiday, but as a pattern over years in a family where one child is the celebrated one and another child is the reliable one, and everyone pretends this is just how things are. I don't think I was a martyr. I made choices. I kept saying yes when I should have said no. I kept believing that being dependable enough for long enough would eventually mean something to the people I was being dependable for. What changed wasn't that I stopped loving my family. What changed was that I stopped organizing my life around the hope that they would one day see me clearly, if I just kept showing up perfectly. The bridesmaid dress is still in my closet. I haven't thrown it out. I'm not sure why. Maybe because it's evidence in its own way. Not of anything legal, just of the particular kind of holt that made me pay $180 and have it altered twice for a wedding where I was also expected to open the bakery at 7 in the morning. Maybe someday I'll donate it. Maybe I'll wear it to something completely different just to make myself laugh. I live 30 minutes from the bakery now. I work full-time at a job that pays me what my skills are worth and doesn't call me on Friday nights because the oven timer is broken. I have a savings account that is mine. I have a life that is mine. My father and I have not spoken since the investigation concluded. I don't know if we will. I leave that possibility open without leaning on it. Some doors don't close cleanly. You just stop standing in the draft. I keep coming back to the bridesmaid dress. Not because it represents some grand injustice, $280 and 2 alterations is not the end of the world, but because of what I was willing to do while wearing hope like that. I paid for a dress, I had it fitted twice. I showed up to every planning meeting, and I still picked up the phone when my mother called the night before and said, essentially, that my presence at the ceremony mattered less than the Saturday morning croissant rush. That's not something that happened to me out of nowhere. That was the result of years of choices, mine included. Every time I said yes when I meant no, every time I covered a shift without asking for anything in return, every time I told myself that being dependable enough would eventually be seen, I was teaching the people around me exactly what I was willing to accept. That's the hard part to sit with, not my father's choices, which were, he's alone and wrong in ways I don't need to qualify, but my own. The pattern I participated in, without fully understanding, I was participating in it. What changed things wasn't anger. Anger had been there for years, and it hadn't changed anything. What changed things was that I finally used what I actually knew. I have a degree. I have skills. I'd been walking into that back office for 2 years and using those skills to help a business that was being quietly drained, and I'd never once thought to look at what I was actually looking at. When I finally did, when I sat at that desk and let myself see the numbers clearly instead of giving everyone the benefit of the doubt, I understood something I hadn't before, that knowing the truth and doing nothing with it is its own kind of choice. There's a version of this story where I found the same records and said nothing, kept covering shifts, kept driving 40 minutes each way on Saturdays, kept believing that loyalty meant absorbing whatever the people I loved needed from me without ever asking whether it was fair. I came close to that version. I sat in my car in that parking lot for 45 minutes, because part of me genuinely didn't want to know what I already knew. But Ren said something I haven't stopped thinking about. She said this is not yours to fix by yourself. And I think what that meant underneath the practical advice was, you are allowed to put the problem down. You are allowed to let the right people carry the right weight. You are not required to hold up a structure that was built on dishonesty just because you love the people inside it. My father made choices that had consequences. That's not cruelty. That's just how things work. The years he spent taking from a business my grandmother built eventually ran into a daughter who knew what she was looking at and had the patience to document it clearly. Not out of revenge, out of finally respecting her own judgment enough to act on it. I don't know what the next version of my life looks like in every detail, but I know it's built on what I actually earned, in a job that pays me what my skills are worth, in an apartment that is mine. That's not nothing. That's the whole thing actually. The quiet, unglamorous, deeply satisfying thing of owning your own life and not apologizing for how you got there. Some doors don't close cleanly. You just stop standing in the draft,